It is finished. We're going to read from John 19. We've got to do a reading of what happened on that day, just to remind ourselves. You know, it's such a well-known story. It's like Christmas. We were given a Christmas quiz with 27 questions on it. I'll do it here one day. 27 questions about Christmas, what it says in the Bible, because we are so changed in our thinking because of Christmas cards. You know, they show things on Christmas cards that aren't in the Bible, or they didn't happen at the same time. So we had this quiz, 27 questions. I was at college, I think I was in my second year. No, it couldn't have been. I must have been in my fourth year, because it was the new pastor that was at the church. And he handed out this quiz, and I got the highest marks in the church. I was almost alone. I got 15 out of 27. 15 out of 27, and it's crazy. We think we know everything. So when we get to the crucifixion, let's read the passage. Let's put our minds back. Let's get down to that point and say, yes, what he's talking about, I've just read, or it has been read to me. So let's have a look at John 19, 16 to 30 this morning. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Let me say one thing before we go any further. The Romans were experts at crucifixion. This wasn't just suddenly a thing put together. Oh no, we'll crucify this person. They were experts. They did it wherever they went. If a person caused problems in the empire, they got crucified. They lined the roads with crucifixes. Now, and you need to understand that. So this wasn't a one-off thing. It was their normal way of punishment. They took him to the place of the skull, and there they crucified him. With him, 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. And the sign was written in Aramaic, written in Latin, for those of you that studied Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews. But this man claimed to be King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Let's not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide by lot who will get it. This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, they divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, woman, here is your son, and to the disciple, here is your mother. From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and that the scriptures would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, it is finished. With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Just so far this morning, we trust the Lord will bless the reading of his word. Jesus was hung on the cross at about 9 a.m. on that dreadful morning. Hence, a lot of churches, our church service is always at 9 o'clock, but a lot of churches who have church at a different time move Good Friday service to 9 o'clock because that is the time that they believe that he was nailed to the cross. He was hung naked. We've never seen a naked picture of Jesus on the cross, but he was hung naked because that's what they did. for all to see him suffer, not only from the beating that he took during the night, but also from the pain that he had to endure from the pain of the nails that pinned him to the cross. And I said to someone this morning, they weren't the nice 6-inch nails that you go and buy in the shop these days that are nice and smooth. They were rugged, hard pieces of metal that were just drilled through his hands. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he asked for something to drink. 9 o'clock to 3, 6 hours he hung on that cross. And they put some water vinegar on a sponge and put it to his lips. Soon after that, he cried, "It is finished." And then he died. When he used the words, "It is finished," those standing around who heard him were probably too filled with emotion to let the understanding fully sink in at that moment in time. When John wrote this gospel, he wrote it in Greek, because he wrote it to the Greek world out there. And the word in Greek for "it is finished" is the word tetelestai. Right? That's an important word. Remember it, because I'm going to repeat it a couple of times. It was an ordinary word used in everyday language of the time. It wasn't a special word. It wasn't the one and only time it was ever used. It was an ordinary word that was used in everyday language. Let me give you a couple of examples. When a difficult task had been completed by the servant for the master, he would say he has done the task to the best of his ability, or "it is finished." Okay, you with me? Tetelestai. That's what the servant would say. The servant would come in to the master and say, "Tetelestai," and the master would say, "Well done. It's done to my satisfaction." In other words, I have completed the task given to me. When the trader had completed the sale, he would use the word tetelestai, which would mean the deal is complete. So we can use it in different points, but it means the same thing. Let's bring it right to the church. When Nelson, who sits at the back there, is also the guy that pushes the heavy lawnmower around to cut all the grass around here, when he has completed cutting the grass on the plot, which he will do next week because we haven't had time to do it this week, he will come to me and say, well, if he does, it'll be a miracle, but he'll come to me and say, tetelestai. Meaning, I have completed the task of cutting the grass. One word, "it is finished," is the way to translate that. All of those who heard him say that word would have understood that he had finished the task that he had set out to do, and nothing could be added. That was it. He said, "It is finished." Tetelestai. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Jesus wouldn't have hung on the cross and spoke in Greek. Yes, he didn't. That's quite right. He would have said it in Aramaic, but the direct translation to Greek is tetelestai, which is, "it is finished." Jesus has paid the price in full. He has cancelled all debt. His sacrifice was the perfect one, and his Father would have been well pleased. Tetelestai, "it is finished." Everything is complete. You all with me? Or do I go? Don't ask me to go back. I've now tapped forward and I can't go back on this. Okay. Well, we have to ask ourselves, when Jesus said, "it is finished," what was finished? What exactly was he talking about? Well, reconciliation was finished. This is a word that's being used and has been and is being used a lot in our own country. Reconciliation. First time I ever came across the word reconciliation was when I did accounting at school and I do a bank reconciliation. And now surely if you can do I know there's some bankers here nodding and saying, "Oh, what does this say?" No, I can do a bank reconciliation twice as fast as any of you, so don't worry about it, okay? But when you get to when you do a bank reconciliation, it should bring the automatic meaning to you. You are agreeing one side with the other, putting it together, and it agrees. Well, with a couple of adjustments. But you know what I mean. So when you understand the word reconciliation, and when Jesus came to reconcile us with God, we understand what happened. He took out the bank statement, he took out his cash book, and he did a reconciliation. Not quite like that, but very similar. Sin has caused a huge divide between man and God. And this has come about through sin in our lives and evil in the world. There's this huge, huge chasm between us. And God created a perfect and beautiful world. And He made people to live in harmony and peace with one another. Just think, if He hadn't eaten the apple because the woman said He had to, we would have been living in the Garden of Eden. Eh? What a place. The bulls would never have lost in that place. It would have been the perfect world. Okay, the perfect world. But look at how we've all just messed things up. Truly, truly messed things up in a big way. Sin has a devastating effect on our relationship with God. Sin separates us from God. And if we want to have any hope at all of going to heaven to be with God, then someone had to deal with sin and restore our relationship with God. So what did God do? He sent His Son to this world for that very, very purpose. That absolute purpose. That was the purpose Jesus came. You say, no, it wasn't. He came because He needed to turn the 5 loaves and 2 fishes into feeding 5,000. That wasn't the reason He came. He came to reconcile us with God. And whatever He did before is not anywhere as important as when He hung on the cross and said, it is finished. Reconciliation can now take place. Jesus died on the cross to get rid of the power of sin, to condemn us. His death bridged the huge gap between us and God. So if we understand, if that's the only thing we understand this morning, let's understand that. That He came for a specific purpose. To absolutely sort out that problem that we had with God. So why did He die for us? He loved us so much that He was willing to die to make things right with the Father. Just think what Jesus had to suffer. And you know the worst part? He knew what was coming. I so wanted to do all the G's this morning. That's not Garth, that doesn't come into it. But the G's, Gethsemane, Gabbatha, and so on, Golgotha, and so on, and so on. The 5 G's. But that we just sort of leave it on the side. But those are vitally important. When He was in Gethsemane, He was sweating drops of blood. He knew what was happening within 24 hours of that time. He knew what was coming. We don't know what's coming in our lives. He knew. If you can, Father, take this cup away from me. What would have happened if God had said, okay, well, if you don't want to go, that's it. You don't have to. I think we'd still be killing sheep and pouring the blood on the sacrifice, because that's what would have happened. But He, being obedient to the Father, went to the cross, shed His blood for you and for me. And God did it all for us. He did all this because of His love for us. When Jesus said that it is finished, He had completed the task set before Him. The reason why He came as a human has been fulfilled. He came so that you and I can have salvation and forgiveness. He came to give us the victory. He came to ensure that we would enter His kingdom and live forever. That's what it's all about. So I'm going to ask you right now just to spend a few moments in silent meditation as we thank Jesus for what He did for us so many years ago. So let's just close our eyes in silent meditation and just spend some time just talking privately to the Lord.